What's up everyone, Winston here. Quick question for you. Why does your grandpa's story about buying a house for $15,000 sound like a fairy tale while you're struggling to afford rent on that same street? You think prices just magically went up? You think your money randomly became weaker? Nah, friend. What happened to your purchasing power wasn't an accident, it was engineered. Today I'm breaking down inflation, and I'm not giving you the textbook definition politicians want you to believe. I'm showing you what inflation actually is, how it's been weaponized throughout history from ancient Rome to modern America, and why central banks openly admit they want your money to lose value every single year. By the end of this video, you'll understand why that dollar in your pocket is designed to be worth less tomorrow than it is today. Let's dive in. What is inflation really? Okay, everyone has an opinion about inflation, right? Politicians blame greedy corporations from podiums. CEOs blame supply chain disruptions. Economists talk about target interest rates as if they were weather forecasts, but let's put all that nonsense aside and give you the real definition in simple terms. Inflation is when your money can buy less tomorrow than it can today. It's that simple. No complicated formulas, no fancy jargon. It's the erosion of purchasing power. The $20 in your wallet, the euros in your bank account, the pesos in your pocket, they all lose value over time. And here's the part they don't want you to focus on. It's not a flaw in the system, it's a characteristic. Now, economists have actually defined inflation in two ways over time, and understanding both is crucial. The original definition, used for centuries, was simple. Inflation means an increase in the money supply. Pretty simple. If governments print too much cash or banks create too much credit, there's more money chasing the same amount of goods. The result? Every currency loses value. It's a basic matter of supply and demand. But something interesting happened in the 20th century. Governments began to shift the definition to something softer and more convenient for them. Inflation meant rising consumer prices. Did you notice the difference? Instead of policies to expand the money supply, they could now point to it on price tags in supermarkets and signs, indicators at gas stations. Clever, right? But the point is, both definitions are interconnected. When you print more money or devalue coins, prices rise. When prices rise, your salary suddenly doesn't become as good as it used to be. Whichever definition you prefer, inflation is a thief in your pocket. Interest rates, the system's brake and gas pedal. So where do interest rates fit into this story? Think of interest rates as the brake and gas pedals of the entire financial system. When inflation gets too high, when prices rise too fast, central banks hit the brakes by raising interest rates. Borrowing becomes more expensive, so people and companies take out less loans, less money flows through the system, and theoretically, inflation falls. On the other hand, when inflation falls or prices actually start to fall, they hit the gas. By lowering interest rates, they make borrowing cheaper and easier, which encourages spending and gets the money moving again. In theory, like a scale, this balances everything nicely. In reality, it means your money is constantly being managed, manipulated, and slowly eroded by decisions made in meetings you weren't invited to, by people you never voted for. Sound familiar? Yes, we've talked about these secret meetings before. Here's a crazy question. Could inflation really be zero? In theory, yes. If the amount of money in circulation and the quantity of goods and services available increased in perfect harmony, prices would remain stable. But the real problem is central banks don't even want that. They aim for about 2% inflation each year. So why would they deliberately want your money to lose value? They'll say, because a little inflation discourages people from saving. It makes it easier to repay government debts in the future with cheaper dollars. And it helps avoid inflation, price decline, because if people wait for prices to fall, they postpone purchases, which slows down the whole economy. So the system is designed to make the money in your pocket lose value over time. Not by accident, it's policy. Think about it. Ancient Rome, inflation by stealth. Now let me show you how this actually played out in history, because this isn't just economic theory, this is a pattern that's been repeating for thousands of years. Let's start with ancient Rome. The backbone of the Roman economy was the silver denarius, a coin that was trusted across the entire Mediterranean world. Solid, reliable, valuable. But as Rome's military campaigns expanded and expenses skyrocketed, emperors discovered a tempting shortcut. Instead of raising taxes or cutting spending, both politically dangerous, they started reducing the silver content of the denarius. They mixed it with cheaper metals like copper and bronze. From the outside, the coins looked identical. Same size, same markings, same official stamp. But on the inside, they were worth significantly less. This went on for decades. Slowly, the denarius lost its shine, both literally and figuratively. People started noticing. Merchants demanded more coins for the same goods because they knew the coins weren't as valuable anymore. Prices climbed as trust in the currency eroded. This was inflation by debasement, a government pretending money was the same when it absolutely wasn't, and the people who got hurt, not the emperors or the wealthy elite who owned land and hard assets. It was the soldiers paid in debased coins, the workers whose wages bought less bread, the savers who watched their life savings lose purchasing power. Spain's silver flood, too much money now jump forward about 1500 years to the 16th century. Spain had just conquered huge parts of the Americas and discovered absolutely massive silver deposits at Potosi in what's now Bolivia. We're talking about one of the richest silver mines in human history. Ship after ship sailed back to Europe carrying literal tons of silver. Suddenly money was everywhere. Spanish markets flooded with silver coins. Sounds great, right? More money, more wealth? Except here's the problem. Food production, available land, and labor didn't multiply nearly as fast as the silver did. The result was what historians call the price revolution. Across Europe, prices for basic goods, bread, cloth, tools, rose sharply and kept rising for more than a century. For a farmer or craftsman living in 1550, life didn't feel richer just because there was more silver circulating. If anything, it felt harder because everything cost more. Their wages might have increased nominally, but not nearly as fast as prices. So whether it was Rome secretly diluting its coins or Spain accidentally drowning Europe in silver, the outcome was identical. When the money supply outpaces real goods and services, money loses value. Inflation isn't some mysterious force, it's just math. And ordinary people always feel it first in their bread prices, their rent, and the shrinking power of their wages. Weimar Germany, when inflation goes insane. If Rome and Spain showed us how inflation begins, the 20th century showed us what happens when it spins completely out of control. And the most infamous example is Weimar Germany in the early 1920s. After losing World War I, Germany was absolutely crushed by reparations payments, massive debts it had to pay to the Allied powers. The government's solution seemed simple, just print the money. At first, it actually looked like a clever way out of an impossible situation. But within months, the printing presses were running 24/7, flooding the economy with paper marks. Prices started doubling, then tripling. But by 1923, the situation had become completely insane. A single loaf of bread cost billions of marks. Workers had to be paid twice a day so they could literally run out and buy food before prices doubled again by evening. Families were burning stacks of banknotes in their stoves because paper money was cheaper than firewood. Think about that for a second. Currency so worthless it was better as kindling. Ordinary savings, entire lifetimes of careful work stored in marks just evaporated into nothing. And here's the absolutely cruel twist. People with debts, including the government itself, actually benefited because they could pay back what they owed in completely worthless money. But people living on fixed incomes or those who had saved responsibly, they were utterly ruined. This wasn't just an economic disaster, it was a social collapse. It shattered people's trust in money, in government, in the entire system, and that breakdown of trust paved the way for political extremism and eventually the rise of Hitler. Inflation doesn't just hurt wallets, it can destroy entire societies. The 1970s. Stagflation hits America now. Not every bout of inflation turns into hyperinflation, but even normal inflation can absolutely wreck people's lives. Take the United States in the 1970s. The decade started with what's called the Nixon shock. In 1971, President Richard Nixon ended the dollar's convertibility into gold, severing the last link between paper money and a tangible hard asset. That unleashed a new era where governments could expand the money supply without any gold backing whatsoever. Then came the oil shocks of 1973 and 1979, when OPEC embargoes sent fuel prices absolutely skyrocketing. The combination created something economists had never really seen before: stagflation. Prices were rising, but the economy was stagnating at the same time. Wages couldn't keep up with inflation. Unemployment was climbing. American families discovered that even with both parents working full-time, they still couldn't cover the mortgage and fill up the gas tank. For a generation that had grown up believing in post-war prosperity and the American dream, it was a brutal awakening. Inflation made it crystal clear: no matter how hard you worked, the system could still make you poorer. Modern examples: Argentina and Zimbabwe. And if you think this only happens in war-torn countries or failing states, think again. Argentina has been grappling with recurring inflation crises for decades. Throughout the 1980s and 1990s, the government constantly printed money to cover budget deficits. Savings were repeatedly wiped out. Argentinians learned a bitter lesson: don't trust your own money. Even today, many people hoard US dollars under their beds instead of keeping pesos in the bank. In fact, the US dollar is losing value. Then there's Zimbabwe in the 2000s, where the situation got even worse. Hyperinflation reached astronomical levels. At its peak in 2008, prices were literally doubling every 24 hours. The government printed 100 trillion Zimbabwean dollars, and that was barely enough to buy food for a few days. These aren't just textbook statistics, these are daily humiliations where people's labor and life savings became worthless almost overnight. So why does all this history still matter right now? Because the system we're living in hasn't fixed inflation. It has normalized it. Governments and central banks openly target around 2% inflation every year. They tell us it's healthy, that it encourages spending and keeps the economy growing. And at first glance, 2% sounds pretty harmless, right? But stretch that out over time. At 2% annual inflation, your money loses half its purchasing power in just about 35 years. In practice, that means your savings, your salary, your retirement fund, all of it erodes slowly but steadily over time. That's not a bug, that's a feature of the system. Why would policymakers deliberately want this? Because inflation quietly transfers wealth. When prices rise, the real value of debts shrinks. If a government owes $10 trillion and inflation eats away 10% of that burden, it becomes easier to pay back. If you have a mortgage, inflation erodes what you owe too. Borrowers win, savers lose, and who's the biggest borrower of all? Governments, which is exactly why they always need a little inflation cooking in the background. The measurement game. Now let's talk about how inflation is actually measured, because even that's rigged. The Consumer Price Index, the CPI, is supposed to track how prices affect everyday people, but it conveniently leaves out or significantly underweights the things that hurt households the most: housing costs, healthcare, education. That allows government officials to stand up and say inflation is under control at 2%, even when families feel absolutely crushed by rising costs in the things that actually matter. The definition itself has been strategically shifted over time. It used to mean expanding the money supply, something governments and central banks were directly responsible for. Now it means rising prices, which can be blamed on anyone else: foreign oil producers, supply chain problems, greedy corporations. The language change hides where the real power and responsibility lie: the winners and losers. Here's the thing though, while inflation destroys savings, it also reshuffles who wins and who loses. In Rome, when the denarius collapsed, people who owned hard assets like land came out stronger. During Spain's silver flood, wealthy landowners weathered the storm while peasants starved. After the 2008 financial crisis, people with cash reserves bought foreclosed homes at bargain prices. Inflation is never neutral. It punishes some people while it rewards others. That's exactly why people keep searching for money outside the system. For centuries, that was gold, a scarce metal that's impossible to print and trusted across every culture. Empires rose and fell, but gold held its value because no government could debase it at will. In the digital age, Bitcoin emerged as the modern challenger. It has a hard cap of 21 million coins, a rule that no central bank can override. Its supply is fixed by mathematical code, making it inflation-proof by design. Now, that doesn't mean Bitcoin is perfect. It's volatile, and governments really don't like currencies they can't control. But its appeal isn't perfection. Its appeal is that it exposes the fundamental flaw of fiat money. Government-issued currency is designed to inflate, while Bitcoin mathematically cannot. So here's the bottom line. Inflation isn't just about prices going up at the store. It's the deliberate erosion of your money's value, either engineered or tolerated by the people in power. It has literally destroyed empires, toppled governments, and left permanent scars on entire societies. And it continues today, hiding in plain sight as an official policy target. If you don't understand how it works, you will always be the one paying the price while someone else profits from the system. History doesn't repeat itself exactly, but inflation always rhymes. The patterns are there if you know where to look, and if you don't recognize them, your money will quietly disappear while the people who understand the game get richer. Alright, so here's my question for you. Do you think 2% annual inflation is really healthy for the economy, or is it just a way for governments to quietly tax your savings? I genuinely want to hear your take on this, so drop your thoughts in the comments below. If this video helped you understand what's really happening to your money, do me a huge favor and hit that subscribe button to Financial Historian Bamboo. If you found this valuable, smash that like button. And hey, if you think I got something wrong or you disagree, hit the dislike button and tell me why in the comments. I read all of them. History has the answers to today's problems. I'm here to show you where to look. Until next time, stay sharp out there. This is Winston signing off.